Well, hey, podcast listeners. In episode 57 of the Pixar Post podcast, we're going to chat about our trip to Pixar Animation Studios for the Coco press event. But get ready, there are so many details in this first interview, which was a roundtable interview with Lee Unkrich, the director, Darla K. Anderson, the producer, and Adrian Molina, the co-director as well. So,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we're going to dig into the event. We're going to talk about not only your experience there, some of the sessions that you were at, and give a highlight of some of those, some of the people that you saw when you were there. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about your reaction to the footage. We'll hint at a secret session that we can't still talk about yet. Yeah. And then we'll play the full 30-minute interview with the trio that we just mentioned before, and we'll intersperse at the end of it with our thoughts about the different topics and questions and details that they talked about. Before we dive in too deep, though, of course, we'll talk about the fact that since the film is not out yet, I think it goes without saying that some of this may be considered spoilers. One of the questions that Lee is asked is about Miguel's character arc. He does not reveal that. So I can say that the spoilers are minimal, and most of it is about the development of the film.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, although there are a couple little things.
Little things.
So if you're avoiding all, well, then you'll have to listen to this after the movie comes out. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, what do you say we get into it, hey?
I agree.
Okay, well, one thing that I wanted to just follow up with on the last episode is that one of the topics that we discussed, being the Disney streaming service that was announced, has garnered a lot of really good debate and feedback. So between Twitter, our post, and then also on YouTube, there's been some good comments back and forth about people saying that no way, when you said that it would be like, what, $19 or $20?
Yeah.
People were like, no way am I going to pay that.
I know, but I think that's what it was going to be.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, there's a ton of content on Netflix for $10.
You're right. So
it could still be there. But anyways, there was a lot of comments about that. There was comments about if it should or should not include the classics and the new stuff and all these other things. So it was good. It was a good conversation. So if you haven't listened to episode 56, jump back afterwards. We talked about, of course, a whole bunch of different things from Coco news and every other items as well, but also included that note about the Disney streaming service that's out there. All right, so let's talk about the Coco press event, the long lead day, as they call it.
Yes.
So give me a sense initially about what you saw, who you talked to. So I guess just start with the experience. So give us a sense of walking in. So the reason why I say this too is because Monsters University was a little bit different as far as the experience walking in, because that was one of the other ones you had gone to. But that one was like they had school sign up, like the movie. They had like the astronomy club and all those things. They had the band playing. Right. But so how did this one compare and contrast to that? What did you see going in and the visuals? Just the first when you walk into the studio.
Yeah, well, this one, because I had gone to the Good Dinosaur one as well. This one was more on par to the Good Dinosaur one. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of hard to beat a live marching band and stuff like that, because that really pumps you up. Right. But, going in, it's always fun going into the studio. It's never like a dull moment. It's really just invigorating to be there. But
well, it's amazing, first off, just going through the parking lot and then the giant Luxo lamp and the ball outside.
We're walking into the studio and then Pete Docter walks by, know, so that's like kind of crazy. You see Pete Docter walks by, Bob Pauly's standing there. So it's crazy to think of like all these people that we consider just like amazing artists. Icons. Yeah, who have changed the animation industry, for like how we think. Right. But yeah, no, it was really awesome. They had, of course, all of the artwork on the walls. And then they had the Papel Picado banners up. And it's kind of like the flags that they always put up when it's like the next film. So those were up in the atrium. I also went shopping in the studio store, which is an experience in itself.
Of course. And how long were you in there?
Okay, so we broke for lunch, and we had about 45 minutes to eat lunch, because we were all kind of running a little bit behind.
So you went to the store on the second day, not the first day?
The second day.
Okay, so still this is like just part of the overall experience.
Yeah, this is just the overall experience. Yeah. And I spent the entire lunch, because, I mean, there's so many people in there.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like our group, but there was other people's employees and stuff in there. It's just overwhelming. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't really buy anything for myself, but I buy stuff for you. I buy stuff for our son. You know, it's hard.
Hey, you got yourself a notebook.
I did get myself a notebook.
Some note cards.
Yeah.
Stickers.
Yeah, but it's just overwhelming. Then by the time I got lunch, you know, I had 2 minutes to eat, you know, a couple spoonfuls of some lunch.
Yeah. All right. So then that's kind of, you know, you're walking in, you're just taking it in, you're seeing all the people. The first night is when you went and saw the footage.
Yeah, the first night we saw the footage. So we saw 35 minutes of it. And I believe I said before in episode 56, some of the footage was rendered, some of it was storyboard, some of it was, you know, missing lighting and shading. It was like all kinds of different variations. But wow, now that I can kind of talk about, I'm not going to spoil storylines or anything like that. And, you know, if you guys are fans of our site, you know that we love looking at the details, the background details. That always stands out to us in Pixar films, Easter eggs, and all that stuff. But especially the details, the small things that really make a Pixar film a Pixar film. Mm-hmm. I will tell you this. I was so engaged and so just focused on these characters and the story that I almost forgot to actually realize how beautiful this film is, like the background film. The story is amazing.
Okay.
Coco, the story is awesome.
Is it?
And the very beginning, the first 2 minutes of the film, how they tell you the story is so creative. I love it. And we know that there's a ton of characters. I know you love a large cast. There are so many characters in this film. Miguel has a family tree that goes back generations. And you'd think that it would be hard to kind of get to know who these people are. The way that this team explained it all, it was very easy to understand. But the story is so good. At least from the first 35 minutes that we saw the story, I gasped when it was over. I was like, no, not here, not now.
Yeah. I
wanted more. It's a beautiful film. I think it's an incredibly special film. I'm really excited about this. And it's funny because it's kind of like WALL-E, where I didn't know if I could be I guess engaged or feel for a robot. I kind of felt that way about skeletons. How am I going to have an emotional connection to a skeleton? Now, granted, they're more like a person, but still I was like, I don't know about like skeletons. Am I gonna feel something? The story, you will.
Okay.
You will.
All right. So you mentioned the large cast, and I'll preview one thing that Lee talks about in the roundtable, which I loved to hear as well, is that somebody asked the question about, is it too large of a cast? And he said, well, no, but I actually wanted more. And I thought that was really cool. I was like, oh my gosh. So he talked about the fact that although they're not in the movie, he knows that there's already more family than what we're seeing. He said, but we knew we had to reel it in to not get too unruly.
Right.
So I just love that.
And what's crazy,
even more.
Right. And what's crazy is not only is there a lot of family in the land of the dead, Miguel's family in the land of the living, in the real world,
it's also big.
Is massive.
Yeah.
It is massive.
Yeah.
Like that you don't really understand that. Like I didn't know, because they didn't really talk about it, how much family Miguel actually has that's living. He has a very large family.
Okay.
So I think that's cool to see both sides. I can't say enough good things from what I've seen so far.
All right. So give us a taste as far as the different sessions that you went to when you were there, as far as not necessarily, you don't have to get into everybody that you met with, but give an idea as far as the sessions, because of course the reason why I say don't get too far into it is because in subsequent podcasts we're going to be releasing those interviews that you recorded and the details from those sessions.
Interviews and presentations.
Right.
One of my absolute favorite sessions that we had was discussing how they brought the skeletons to life. And that was with Ginny Santos, Daniel Arriaga, Emron Grover, and Byron Bashforth. That was an amazing session. And we do have a post coming about that too.
It'll be out by the time this is out.
Yes, so it is out.
So yes, you can obviously go to pixarpost.com and you can check that out there. But yes, that
was how they brought the skeletons to life. Another excellent one was the production aspect, where we talked to Daniel Feinberg, we talked to set supervisor Chris Bernardi, and Harley Jessup, who I've spoken with before for The Good Dinosaur. That was another very interesting one that talked about the land of the dead, basically, because that's where the majority of this film is going to take place. And that was... it's just so funny, the small details and like what you learn, and I don't want to go into it because again, we have a one-on-one with them as well as the presentation, but that was a very interesting one. And of course, story. You know, I love the story department. I think those guys and girls are just so incredibly talented. I wish I had that mindset. I wish I had that mind and that artistic skill. But that was with Adrian Molina and Dean Kelly, who is like an incredible, story artist.
Yeah.
And then we also learned about Pepita and Dante with some character artists.
And Pepita, by the way, that's another character that was technically revealed last week as an exclusive from another website, but we actually have a post that we're posting about that as well, and you've got a cool story where you painted that character. Yes.
So a character artist named Alonso Martinez, he was actually very integral in, he has a massive collection of these alajibres, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, that he would collect when he would go down to visit family in Mexico, which is where he is from. He moved to the States, I believe it was Texas, when he was 13. But he has this massive collection, and he brought them into the studio, and the, characters, or the character artists and everything got inspiration from seeing these, alajibres, and they put those designs into the film. So Alonso was the one who was behind making 3D replicas. 3D?
Yeah, 3D printing.
Yeah, 3D printed molds of Pepita. And during this press event, we were able to paint them. Now, of course, me being like a perfectionist, I only got half of mine done because I was like doing shading and all that stuff. So I need to finish mine. But that was a lot of fun. And literally, Alonso Martinez is one of the happiest, nicest people. He's just so smiley and he's just so pleasant. You can't help but be in like a good mood, and he is so passionate about this film. And that's what I liked about everybody. Everyone on this film was passionate. I mean, Daniel Arriaga, the passion that he talked to when I spoke with him about, where he drew inspiration from, with Miguel. And he, explained to me it was from like his son. He drew inspiration. It was just all so interesting. Like everyone was like, this is, you just felt how special it was in each presentation. Which was infectious.
So that sounds like that was 4 presentations.
Yes, that was 4. And then the 5th one was our roundtable with the 3 filmmakers.
The interview you're going to hear today.
Producers.
Yep.
And then the 6th one is a secret. Can't talk about it yet.
Yeah. It's not ultimately all that secret, but unfortunately it's one of those ones that until a later date we can't talk about it yet because there's some extra news that they don't necessarily want coming out yet.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. So we'll be definitely giving you some more details there. So you talked a little bit about the footage, and before we had talked about the lighting and all those kind of things, you talked about the fact that it's very dark. The movie is dark because it's set mostly in the Land of the Dead.
Which is all set at night. There's no daytime in Land of the Dead. It's all at night.
Exactly. Well, is it not daytime, or is it not nighttime, or is it
It's
just
just
there's
dark. There's
no time,
Yeah,
really. So it's just dark. So yeah, you had gotten a question answered, which was pretty cool. We'll talk about it actually after we play the interview, but it was pretty cool that you got one of your questions answered in there as well.
And which was funny that I asked that question because it was really your question.
Well,
I made sure to ask one of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Keep you in the loop. Keep you there, but you're not there.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we
I'll
always
give
help.
you credit.
We always we always help each other out when we write questions. So, what's yours is mine, and vice versa.
And what's mine is mine. I'm just kidding.
Isn't that how it goes? So, okay, so let's get into the roundtable, because obviously it's just so exciting, all the details. I loved hearing it because obviously I wasn't able to be there to hear it firsthand, so it was nice being able to hear the recording of it through yourself and your visit. So one thing to note is that we're going to actually, the recording will start after the second question is asked, and the only reason is just because at the very first question there was still so much room noise of people coming and going and coughing and people getting situated that it did not record well, but obviously we could still hear it. But the first question was actually, so I'll just tell you what it was. So the first question was about how many references to The Shining are in Coco. And
of course, there was quite a few Shining references discussed during our 2-day press event.
Of course, yes. People at the low-hanging fruit for people to ask that question of Lee. But he said essentially that he knows of 2 that he placed, I believe he said.
Yeah.
And then he said there's definitely others. He said one that the crew told him about that he...
Yeah, one of the 2 that he knows about was so hidden that a crew member had to tell him where it was, or he wouldn't have been able to find it.
And then he said there's definitely more in there that the crew has hidden that he doesn't even know about yet. So he noted 2 initially. So where we're going to pick up with the recording as well is that the next question is about what other movies influenced how the afterlife was depicted in Coco. So we'll go ahead and pick this up. But actually, right before we pick it up, I'll also note that a couple questions in, there was another one that it was a woman that was way in the back corner, and we had to crank it up to hear when she said it. So we'll come back in just to repeat that, to ask that question, and then continue the interview from that one as well. All right, so here, we'll pick up again. What other movies influenced, or how much research did they do from other movies about how the afterlife is depicted in Coco?
We looked at every movie that we could think of that had some depiction of an afterlife or heaven. And in most cases, it kind of showed me what I didn't want to do. It's an interesting thing. We found a lot of films where I think we have this innate desire to know what's beyond, if anything. And so there have been a number of movies that kind of have a visual depiction of that. And in every case, I think we want to know, but then we don't like how limited those views are, except maybe in a really stylized kind of like Defending Your Life, where you're just going purely for comedy. Anyway, we tried to forge our own path and do something kind of unique and different than what anyone had ever done, and try to keep it grounded in a reality, rather than going for just completely crazy, anything goes kind of environments. We tried to have a logic to our Land of the Dead, and I don't know how much you guys have heard today. Do they have any talks about the design of the Land of the Dead? Yeah. So about all the layers of history and the towers. Yeah. So we just tried to come up with a logic for why everything was the way it was. I think you have to kind of do that, otherwise it's becomes this anything goes, there are no rules to the world kind of situation.
Our idea of an afterlife is often like a place with no suffering, whereas it seems like the Land of the Dead in the movie is like a society that has to function, and there's conflicts, and it seems like it's not that. How much did the Mexican culture's idea of what the afterlife might be like factor into that versus trying to make it a place where Miguel could go and have an adventure?
Well, it was interesting. You jump in, but I will say one thing that was interesting to me is that in all of our research and all the people that we spent time with and families we spent time with down in Mexico, we would often ask them what their vision was of an afterlife, and pretty consistently people would just say, I don't know. So there wasn't like some set vision of an afterlife that was tied to Dia de los Muertos. So we found that we were pretty much left on our own to figure that out. I mean, we knew we wanted it to be a celebratory place. We knew that the people who were there were probably excited every year to have this opportunity to go back and visit their loved ones. So there would generally be this kind of buoyant, festive atmosphere to everything that we did there. So that's really what kind of drove us to create that vision.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say, is the idea that this is the one day of the year where they all get the opportunity. Like, if you think of the Day of the Dead from the point of view of the dead, this is the one day a year where they get to go back and see their family and check in with how they've grown and how the family has expanded. And so it really lent itself to creating excitement and an energy that you would feel throughout this land for the whole night.
And we made some rules. I mean, I knew from the get-go I didn't want it to be full of gags. Like, I didn't want to have a star bones on the corner. I didn't want to have that level of humor in the film. I wanted to have everything kind of make sense. We did make some rules, like we said that whatever people's jobs were in life, they continued on in the land of the dead. That might be great for some people. It might suck for some people. They have to keep doing what they do. But we just wanted to have some ground rules so that there was some structure to the society. And especially because we wanted the Riveras to still be making shoes, even in the afterlife, so that Miguel really didn't have anything to look forward to. Went there.
All right, so pardon the interruption, but this is that other question I mentioned. So it was from a woman who asked, how would you like Mexican communities and cultures to view? So what would you like them to take away from the film?
I think so much of the film is about family and your connection to family. And, in my experience, in my upbringing, it's true of my Mexican-American community that is very important. And to be truthful to the fact that families aren't always completely functional. And so
mine is.
But I think that's a very universal thing. I think a lot of people are going to take that away. So I think one really beautiful thing about this film in particular is to be able to feature a Mexican family and to be able to feature Mexican protagonists. And I think there's something really beautiful and necessary about being able to see yourself up on screen, see yourself as the hero, and for a Mexican American or Mexican family to be able to go together and have that experience. I think that would be a unique thing that they could share in watching this film.
And we hope that our audience in those communities feel like we got it right, that we spent the time to get the details right, and that we dove deep and really did our best to come to understand the traditions and just the intricacies of the holiday, and communicated in a way that spoke to those communities but also were accessible to everybody around the world.
And speaking of family, you have a lot of members of Miguel's family in the movie. Was there ever a concern that there were too many characters to follow or to keep up with? And how did you guys settle on the magic number that you ended up with?
I actually wish there were more in some regards, just because families would have exponentially gotten bigger and bigger from if you had all these multiple generations, but that just would have been completely unwieldy. So we had to narrow down to kind of the core group that we thought would be traveling together in a pack. I think that Miguel probably has more family there that we don't meet in the movie, but the core group of people are kind of his closest relatives that kind of hew together. And it really came down to finding just a nice assortment, both visually, the look of the different characters and their personality types, so that we would have kind of a broad spectrum of different kinds of characters.
It was important. We really wanted him to come from a multi-generational family, even just in the land of the living, because it plays into this theme about connecting across generations. it also became a thing that as we were telling the story, we knew like, oh, there's a very particular order in which we need to introduce people. Just like even when I go to my own family reunions, it's like, how are they related to us again? What, you know, and so in the storytelling, we wanted to get this feeling of a big family, of a multi-generational family, but also to be able to keep the audience on track with who is important for Miguel's journey.
Yeah, and then because we have so much family, it's also important, and they don't, you know, they can only have so much free time. We want to make sure that they read through with their own unique personalities and have their own, you know, and it's entertaining and fun and specific.
Yeah, it's tough when you have a big ensemble cast to give everyone their own arc. I mean, we learned our lesson back when we made A Bug's Life. That was kind of the first movie we made where there were lots of characters together, and we went down a lot of paths where we gave characters big, elaborate arcs from beginning to the end, and you know, then you have a 4-hour movie. So, having learned that lesson, we knew from the get-go here that we needed to just come out with very specific, clear, identifiable character types for Miguel's family, and just stick with those and not try to do more than that.
Tell me about Miguel's signature arc.
Well, I can't really talk too much about it. One of the whole movie.
It's going to trick you.
But I mean, you kind of get the setup that Miguel's in this kind of untenable situation where he has this dream and this passion that he wants to pursue, and it's just not going to happen in the odd family that he's in, and he sees this strange, once in a lifetime opportunity to kind of maybe solve his situation. He thinks, he hopes, but I can't say much more beyond that. Right.
The film seems to take place across, I guess, one day, or maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I've seen it, I've interpreted it. Did that ever influence what you felt like you could accomplish in the story, like what characters, their motivations might change, how much could they change? Was that ever a limiting factor, or did it allow you to do other things? I'm just curious as to what the time frame, how that played into the story.
Yeah. Well, you know, you always, when you're starting out creating a story like this, you're looking for where the tension is. You know, if there's some kind of ticking clock or some urgency in the story, and we didn't have that at first, but over time, as we developed the story, you know, we came up with this notion of the whole story basically taking place in the one night, and that you know, that there was a deadline for Miguel to be able to get back out of the land of the dead. You're right, it does make things potentially more difficult if you're trying to put characters through big changes, big arcs in the course of the story when you're trying to do it more or less in real time. But that was a challenge we took on, and hopefully you'll feel that we pulled it off.
There's Spanish sprinkled out throughout the movie, and not all of it is translated. What was the decision behind that? Do you feel like there are certain expressions that I get that seem to be like an inside joke if you understand Spanish, but other people might be left out? What was the thought process about how much Spanish to include?
We definitely knew we wanted to include it because so much of the feeling of being in Mexico comes from the language. But then we also knew that this is going to be the domestic version of the film, and you know, most of our audience is probably going to come from a background where they may not know Spanish, and they may only relate to the English language part. So we kind of created what's the word I'm looking for? A framework for when to use Spanish and when not to. So if it's something where in context, the way the character's acting tells you what the word means, even if you don't know what the word means. Like when Abuelita goes up to her grandson and she strokes his face and she says, "Ay, mijo," you know, you gotta listen to your family. We know that that's a gesture of affection, so we don't necessarily need to translate mijo to be my child. But if it's something that is crucial for the storytelling, like De La Cruz, there's a big billboard for De La Cruz's Sunrise Spectacular. That becomes a location that we go to visit later in the film. And so that we want to translate into the language of the people who are watching it. So in the United States, that would be English. In Mexico, that will be in Spanish. In Japan, that will be in Japanese. So we tried to figure out a way to make sure our storytelling was clear while still preserving the language to give the world some reality to it.
Right, and just to piggyback on that, we decided early on we wanted all the signage everywhere, everything in the movie to be in Spanish, unless it was something where the audience needed to get some story point from it. In which case, we'll be translating it into lots of different languages. But it just felt weird to have a movie set in Mexico and then just have all the signs everywhere being in English.
And a little bit remember when Gael was talking about, chamaco and little things like that.
Little bits of Spanish would come from the actors, and that was really nice to be working with. A lot of our actors are Spanish speakers, and so a lot of the times, I have a little bit of Spanish as a second language, but my primary language is English, and so I'll write a line that expresses what we need to express, but then we also want to use our actors as a resource and say, like, if you can say this line in a way that feels more natural to you and more natural to this character, by all means, go for it. And Gael really went for it, and he started keying onto things like, I want to call him Chamaco because that feels like an old-timey kind of way that this guy might relate to this kid. And we're like, okay, do it, go for it.
That's fun.
Now, speaking of Spanish, there are other nationalities out there who may not get the type of dialect. Like, I'm Colombian, Puerto Rican. And then, I come from New York where you have Dominicans, you have pretty much everything else. Are these films going to be, like, for example, if it's released in Peru, will it have Peruvian dialect or Colombian dialect, or is it going to be straight out?
I think it's straight up. I think we have a Latin American version of the film that's consistent across Latin America. And in those cases, there might not be, like, the dialect might not be right, but it's specific to Mexico. And so hopefully, even if it's playing in Colombia or somewhere else, it'll feel like it's up in Mexico.
We think about it kind of like the Harry Potter movies. They're all in English, but they're in English from England because that's where that film takes place. And this is a film that takes place in Mexico. So if the Harry Potter movies were dubbed to be in American English, it might feel a little weird. And on this film, I think it's appropriate for
New York accent Harry Potter.
Harry.
I saw some concept art yesterday of Mexican historical figures. I was wondering if they're going to appear in the film at all, or if that was just for test. Like Pancho Villa's one of them.
No, we do have some historical figures in the film. In fact, we just released a new trailer today in Mexico, and if you pick through it, I think you'll find some people that may recognize faces.
So I'm curious, like, Lee, where the idea came from, and in particular, how you and Darla in particular too recognize, okay, I'm really interested in this story that's maybe not my culture, but there's something about it that I'm really excited by. Can you just talk about navigating that and what interested you about it to begin with, and then how you went about that potentially tricky thing of telling maybe somebody else's story in a way?
Right. It was definitely an issue. There were kind of two things that interested me from the get-go. One, I had always been drawn to Dia de los Muertos, the idea of the celebration, the folk art, the iconography of it. And it was that coupled with, we've gone down to Mexico a lot over the years to promote our films. And I've always seen, especially a love for Pixar's films in Mexico, kind of almost more than, everyone loves Pixar films around the world, but there's something about Mexico that's really intense. I was shocked when I learned that Toy Story 3, when it opened in Mexico, was the biggest film ever in Mexico, like beyond Avatar, beyond Titanic, all the films that you think of as being the biggest films of all time. We've since been surpassed by The Avengers, but for a while, we were the biggest film. And it just showed to me again that, there's an affection for our characters down there. So when I was kicking around ideas for a new film, I was actually at Epcot with my family toward the end of promoting Toy Story 3, and we were in the Mexico pavilion down there, and I was looking at some paper mache sculptures that I've since learned were actual folk art, real folk art, not just made by Disney, that they had gotten their hands on.
From the
Linares family. And that started the first little seed of me thinking, wow, I've never seen anything quite like that in animation or live action. There hadn't been a film about Dia de los Muertos, and so I came back and started talking with Jason Katz, who's my head of story, and he had always had an affection for the celebration as well, and so we started digging in and just doing a much deeper level of research than, and I started learning more about the celebration, and the beauty of it really opened up to me. It blossomed and went beyond just an appreciation of the artwork and down into kind of a much deeper understanding of what the celebration was really all about, and this whole notion of this family reunion that spans the divide between the living and the dead. And I just started to see a lot of potential for a story. And pretty early on, we pitched it to John Lasseter. John always likes directors to pitch him 3 different ideas when they're thinking of a new film. So I had 3 different things that I pitched, but John immediately said this is the one that he wanted us to pursue. And so that happened to be just a few weeks from Dia de los Muertos back in 2011, and so we all got on planes and headed down to start our research in earnest. And this is an ongoing process. That was 2011, so you can tell there's years in there of what. I mean, some of it's world building and building our characters, but a lot of those early years are just developing story. And we go down a lot of different paths along the way, and we were constantly meeting with cultural advisors and learning more about the celebration, learning more about traditions, and all of that continued to inform and kind of guide us towards the story that we ultimately told. And then in terms of me not being Latino, I just knew, from day one, the moment John said, yes, this is the idea I want you to pursue, I went, oh my gosh, what did I just get myself into? Because I knew that I had to get it right? The last thing I wanted to do was make a film that felt like it was made by an outsider. I mean, I'm not Latino, and I will never be Latino. I just can't change that. I can't be taller than that. But I comforted myself in knowing that there have been a lot of great films made over time by filmmakers that were not of the cultures they were making films about. So I took the responsibility very seriously and I have for many, many years. And it's been great having Adrian at my side and all of the cultural consultants that we've gathered, and the many Latino members of our crew that have been a part of this for a long time. And I hope we got it right. If we have any missteps, it's not for lack of trying really hard.
Yeah, and for me, I grew up in Los Angeles and went to school in San Diego, and have always had an affinity for this culture and traveled extensively down to Mexico, and it's such an exciting world, and it's such an exciting idea to go into this imaginative world, and it seems so perfect for animation. And I'll say that I think like a lot of people at Pixar, once we pitched this idea to John, and he said yes, that there's a palpable excitement at the studio about the idea of exploring this whole universe. So it's been this really fun journey.
When I heard that Coco got greenlit, I was like, put me on that movie. This sounds wonderful. This sounds beautiful. And the doors have always been open in terms of, talking about who is this family, who are these characters, what are the experiences that we all as individual artists come from as a studio, and how can this inform the story we're telling. And I know for my part, and for a part of a lot of the story artists, and a lot of the artists all around the studio, there's just always been this passion for the film and this kind of open door arena to be able to express what this film means, what it's going to mean to the Latino community, bringing in our cultural collaborators, and every step of the way saying, like, we as storytellers, this is how we know how to approach it, and anything where we might have blank spots, we let us know, and let's make this film together. So that was really great.
What role did the cultural advisors kind of play in shaping the story? Did you guys have stuff that you sent them for feedback, or did they early on in the process kind of give you suggestions suggestion?
When we started bringing them in, when we make our films, we screen the films internally every 12 weeks or so. And we try to do that like clockwork, just to give ourselves the discipline to evaluate what we're doing and have time to course correct and continue to improve the stories. And so we did something that we've never done on any other film. We actually brought the core team of our cultural consultants, who I think you've met today, the three of them. We started inviting them to every one of those screenings. So normally at Pixar, we play our cards really close, and it's not until very late in production that we start to do public preview screenings. But in this case, we started showing the film not just to them, but we had a series of screenings where we brought in cultural advisors from Los Angeles and different places around the country. Some pretty important figures in the Latino community, and let them into the tent, as it were, to see what we were up to. And some of them were very wary about what we were doing, and not sure what our intentions were, and how seriously we were taking it. But I think we put them at ease pretty quickly, but also made them feel comfortable giving us sometimes big notes. We made some big changes in the story based on the input that we got from the advisors. It was always in an effort to make the characters relatable and the story great. We didn't want this to be a lesson. I feel like people are coming to the movies to get a culture lesson. But we wanted to get everything right. And a lot of times the notes that they gave us ended up making the film even more entertaining. As an example, the character of Abuelita, Miguel's grandmother, early on in the story reels, Abuelita carried a wooden spoon around with her that was tucked into her apron string like a gun, like in a holster kind of a thing. And she would whip that out and kind of beat people with it when she was angry at them. And it was one of her advisors who said, no, it has to be her chancla. She's going to pull off her slipper and beat them with it. So there were lots of examples of things like that where, we listened to people.
Which is perfect with the Shu family, so it's perfect all the way around.
It was always meant to be. We just needed to find our way there.
So this being an all Latino voice cast, there's a Pixar tradition of having John Ratzenberger do a voice. So is he in this? And if not, did somebody have to call him to tell him he's not?
We really struggled with that one because as of this moment, we do have an all-Latino cast because we haven't recorded John yet. But I have found one line for him that I'm going to give him because I didn't want to be the one to break tradition. It's gone on since Toy Story. So we're going to have an all-Latino cast plus John Ratzenberger.
So Pixar's always been great with subtle, lighting cues, making the emotion of the story, go along. Like Mike Wazowski in Monsters University, when he was down, he was in the shadows, and then when he was the hero, he was in the sunlight. Can we look forward to a lot of those lighting cues in Coco, even though it's mainly a dark film?
Well, definitely. Whenever we head into figuring out the color and the light of the film, we create these elaborate color scripts where we kind of work that out from beat to beat so that the choices that we make aren't arbitrary. They're always in service of the story and the underlying emotions. This film was challenging in that when Miguel is in the land of the dead, it's always night there. There's no daytime in the land of the dead. So in some regards it limited us, but it actually allowed us to make the film much more colorful than we could have made it if we had scenes during the day. It's really gorgeous all the way through the whole. I think the whole film's beautiful, but when we're in the land of the dead, it's there's a lot of really striking, colorful work that Danielle and her team did that is unlike anything I think in any of our films.
So this film is huge, elaborate, exuberant. Did the studio ever say to you, no, too expensive?
No. Our consistent and constant challenge is time. This film is big and it needs to get released. So the studio's been just unbelievably supportive of everything that we've gotten up on screen, with understanding the reality that it eventually has to come out. So,
but you're right, it is big. And people always ask, what was the technical challenge on this film? And in this case, we're to the point where we've figured out how to do just about anything. I mean, there's a cost associated with it, but in this film, it's really about the scale. It's just how big the world is and the number of characters that we have and the size of the crowds that we have. So we were creating a Land of the Dead, and we needed to populate that with a lot of people, and a lot of people wearing clothes. And just all those things, all those details add up to a lot of work for a lot of big teams of people.
It sounded like you had to create a lot of new programs to work on this film. Did you have to create more for Coco than for some of the previous Pixar films, like with Merida's hair and Brave? I'm sure that was quite intensive as well. This one with the lights, and was there more for Coco than previous?
Every film has something that we haven't done before that we have to figure out. And again, this was about scale. So, when you look at the Land of the Dead and the towers and all the buildings, there's just millions of light sources, and we had to figure out how to get the amount of detail we wanted into the world without somebody having to hand make every little aspect of it. So they had to come up with a lot of procedural ways to kind of define the look of a tower, but let them kind of organically grow in the computer and find variations so that you didn't feel kind of a repetition in the Land of the Dead. So it was really more, it was all about kind of figuring out how to scale up all the work that we had done already and get it through the pipeline. That's really where the challenges were.
Thank you all.
All right, so tell me you didn't get a lot of insights from that.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so a couple things that I wanted to talk about and discuss a little bit more. I think when you talked about at the very beginning about the story and how it grasped you from that, I think really the notion when Adrian was talking about that they wanted the Land of the Dead to be a celebratory place, that people are genuinely excited to go back and see their loved ones, and that it's this one day a year where they can check back in and see how people have grown and what's changed and all these kind of things. I mean, that alone is chilling.
Yes, and what's crazy is I didn't feel sad when I was like visiting these characters and learning about these characters who had passed. I didn't feel any sense of sadness or anything like that. Now we know the story is going to go a certain way about, some characters.
Well, that's very vague.
I know, but I can't say anything really. But so I know there's going to be sadness in it. I think it might be Bing Bong level sadness.
Oh gosh, I can't handle it again.
At least that's what I shouldn't say it's like my theory, but that's what my prediction.
Well, obviously, yeah, you haven't seen. You've seen 35 minutes, so
yes,
I mean,
I don't know, but I have a feeling.
Okay.
Certain characters.
Oh no. If I have to like hold myself in the theater again,
but yeah,
to like get a hold of myself.
But it was very celebratory. It wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, you can hear that is what they were genuinely going for, and that's so exciting.
Yeah, you didn't feel sad that these people were gone because they're still with us. That's how I felt. Like, oh, they're not here, but they're still here.
But is there an underlying? They're genuinely excited to go back and see the relatives, but isn't that also heartbreaking in a way? That you have to wait for this one day a year?
Yes, and there's one scene that features like a older couple coming back and watching their family.
Right.
And like saying, oh, look how, big, they're getting.
Right.
That part was, kind of like, oh. But then it's kind of like, oh well, they're here.
They can see,
yeah,
right? Yeah, I mean,
so
yeah,
it's like a hard thing to balance, but it's very.
This movie's gonna kill. It's gonna get me.
Yeah, from what I saw, it's very beautifully done.
Yeah. So there's also the note that Lee had mentioned, which was actually also from an Entertainment Weekly article from before that we had talked about, like August 13th.
Yeah,
it was in the August 18th issue of Entertainment Weekly, about the funny note about having the job. So the job that you have in the Day of the Dead is the job you had when you
were living.
When you were living. So yeah. So first off, I guess when I pass away, I'd like to make that be in retirement because I don't really want to be working forever. Because he makes that awesome joke about for better or for worse. Like,
Right.
that means you could have a junky job and you're stuck with that job, or you could have a great job and hey, great.
Right.
So I thought that was great. Such a cool little rule that they followed.
I think it's fun too.
It is very fun. It leaves for some room for some good jokes, yet not, it's kind of cool. Obviously, I kind of already hinted at it as well, but I made a note about the passion for the project. So I thought it was great when Lee said his note about that he really wanted to find a way to properly represent this holiday, but and also make it accessible for the world. So this is not just a film for people that live in Mexico or that celebrate Dia de los Muertos. It's a film about family. It's a film about heart. It's passion. It's so many other things.
Well, not only that, but I also think it's how eye-opening to learn about new cultures. Not even new cultures, but cultures just to get more culturally aware of, what we all celebrate. To me, I think that's really important, just to, learn about your fellow neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And I said it sometime like mid last year. I mean, it was well over a year ago that I predicted that this movie is going to be the movie that's going to make people care about Dia de los Muertos and potentially make it a holiday that people will celebrate here. I can already tell you that I want to do it myself.
I agree. I agree.
mean, it's just from hearing what I've heard in the interviews and the sessions that you were at and experiences that we've had, I think it's a great thing. And I'm actually, that's one thing that I'm really excited about this movie, is that other people can potentially have that mindset afterwards as well, because I think it's something that especially Americans who are so sheltered and afraid to talk about death and don't really want to face it can really benefit from. And I think it's a heavier topic in the movie that I don't think kids are going to necessarily think about or pick up, but adults might take something away from it. And that excites me.
Yeah. So we need to have an ofrenda this upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other things that have been coming up recently in the news, I'll say the news, but recently among our Twitter feed, after character reveals of Pepita and things like that, people are still in the realm where they want to bash Coco and say, how is this different than Book of Life? It's a ripoff. If you listened to this roundtable and didn't feel the authenticity that this is a unique and different film, you're crazy. There's also just, you hear what we're talking about. We're talking about family. That is a universal story. We're talking about passion. That's a universal thing. It has nothing to do with being a ripoff. The director of Book of Life has written Lee and talked a lot about the fact that they're definitely different and unique films. There are certainly some similarities with the musical aspects, but again, there's a musical element to the Dia de los Muertos holiday and celebration.
But to me, it's like, okay, so there's the Book of Life and there's Coco. How many Christmas movies are there?
Right.
How many, there's, you can't just have one. Someone's always going to compare it to something else.
Yeah. I also absolutely loved that Lee just addressed it head on. After he was asked in this as well, where he talked about the fact that he's like, I'm not gonna be Latino.
Yeah.
But he's like, but I have a genuine interest in it. I surrounded myself with people that do. They brought their own opinions to the project. We reached out and did things we've never done by opening it up to the public, people outside of Pixar, much earlier. And they allowed the vocal cast to change some things around. They talked about his grandma with the wooden spoon, and they changed it to the slipper. It's just I can't even entertain that question anymore, or that thing, that underlying feeling any longer.
Right.
From everything you've told me, from everything we've seen, people are going to walk away I feel like that, just like usually what happens, all of that strife that people have and all the chatter is going to go away when the film is in theaters. Because once you see it, you're going to feel differently. I can feel it in you.
Yes.
I can see it in what I'm seeing, and I can hear it in the interviews that you brought back.
I mean, I have no other words other than to say this is just an incredibly special film.
So the other thing I thought was actually really cool, again, keeping to the authenticity, is that there's Spanish sprinkled throughout the movie. And this is what you were talking about on the last podcast.
Yes.
That you were like, there's something that I can't really
There's
say.
There's something that I can't say because I don't want to get in trouble. But
it was when we were talking about the international trailer.
Yes.
And how we were talking about the lip sync and how amazing it was. And I'm like, how is it possible?
Yeah, because you were
that
like,
they did the lip sync.
The lip sync, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well.
And it was translating. It was not translating, but going back and forth between English and Spanish very readily.
There is a lot of Spanish speaking in Coco, and what's great about that, I don't know Spanish. I took 4 years of French. I still don't know French, but but I don't know Spanish either. But you understand it. Mm-hmm. You understand it within the actions. You don't need to and it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It just it adds to the story so much. It's
because it makes it feel so much more authentic.
It's just beautiful. Well, it's hearing like their language. Mm-hmm. It's the characters' like I don't know. It's just beautiful. You understand it. Even being like not understanding. I don't know. I can't describe it. I can't explain it. But it's so well done.
Yeah.
Like the phrases and the sentences they chose to have Spanish and not have Spanish, and it's very well done. Like I said, the first 35 minutes I've seen is spot on.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I loved hearing Lee's story about how the idea kind of came to him as well, about how during some of the press junkets they were doing around the world and in Mexico, he started getting some exposure to the culture there. And then even in Epcot in Disney, he's like, I saw this folk art, and it wasn't like Disney put it there. It was like, they put it there, but it was legitimate folk art from...
Yeah, and that's one family makes those aljibres in Mexico.
Right.
In Epcot, that Mexico Pavilion in Epcot.
Right.
And what's crazy about it is all the wood is from a tree called copal, I believe, and it's from Oaxaca.
Ah.
Yeah, which is one of the places they went for their research, I believe.
Right. Yes, we talked about that on a much earlier podcast when I was breaking down all the different regions that I thought he visited.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But certain regions of Mexico, certain families, will tend to do more like Mexican aljibres, and some will do more like cat designs and stuff like that. So I'm interested because we're going to Disney World soon to see... I think I want to buy one, honestly.
Sure.
I really, really do.
Yeah. I mean, until we can actually get to Mexico to get one ourselves directly, we might as well get the next best thing, which is
the Mexican
pavilion made by
Epcot.
People that are from there in that region.
It's a family. I forget their names.
He mentioned it. He mentioned it in there. But I thought it was cool that because of that exposure that he had, he pitched it as far as along with his 3 other films to John Lasseter. They said that one, and of course it gets greenlit days before the Dia de los Muertos celebration, so they go down to Mexico to start gathering research like right away.
Which, didn't you think it was interesting to find out? I don't remember if we ever knew that when you have to pitch, to the Brain Trust and John Lasseter, that you have to have 3 ideas.
Okay, so yes, we did.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
But I didn't know that applied to everybody, including like Lee Unkrich. I'm wondering, does that mean that Pete Docter and Andrew Stanton?
Be.
I mean, if Lee is, you would assume they are too. But yes, I did know that, and we had talked about it with a short process. But that's probably why your mind was just thinking about it differently, because it was from a short process versus the feature films. Because Dave Mullins talked about it for Lou, and then we heard about it from Mark Walsh with Party Source Rex, a couple other folks. But yeah, it's always been, when we've heard it, it's always been related to the short films
or tunes.
So interesting there. Also, very glad to hear that Ratzenberger's in there. We worried about that, or wondered about that, I should say, when they said that it was going to be an all Latino cast.
Yeah.
So
Lee said there's
interesting.
one line for him.
One.
Yeah,
Yep.
and Lee had also mentioned, I can't remember if it was in this or if he mentioned it somewhere else, that he didn't want to be the one person to not have
to break it.
Ratzenberger in it. Yeah.
That's hilarious. So yeah, I was also excited to hear, like I said at the top of this, that you got your question answered about the lighting cues.
Yes.
So as far as how are they doing that, seeing as it's so dark in this, there's not a lot of stepping into the light, stepping out of the light. So that was really exciting. I was glad to hear that. I guess that pretty much wraps us up then, eh?
I guess
at
so.
At least for this episode.
This episode.
We've got many more. We've talked about it, that there's lots of sessions that are coming up and some more information that you're going to hear. In fact, next time we realized we forgot one element to talk about, which was about some of the folks that Julie bumped into in the studio.
Yes.
So we'll talk
Some
about
of the
that.
Pixarians.
So we'll talk about that on the next episode. And we'll actually also go back. There was a follow-up question for our Ask Pixar Post segment where we were kind of talking about like Buzz or Woody or this or that. We got asked another one, which was a doozy. So we'll follow up with that one as well in the next one. We just wanted to make this one just get it done, get it out there about the roundtable because it was so exciting. So, all right, well, I think that about wraps us up. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. Lastly, if you like today's show, let us know. Rate us on iTunes, leave a comment on our site, leave a comment on YouTube, which has been definitely an area that's been picking up since we've been posting our podcasts there as well, or send us an email at info@pixarpost.com. Signing off as usual, I'm TJ.
And I'm Julie.
And be sure to stay tuned to pixarpost.com all week for the latest Pixar news. Bye-bye.